You pushed through the heavy glass and wood doors, and the first thing you heard wasn't music, it was the sound of a city in motion. The floor creaked in those familiar spots you learned to expect, usually right near the candy counter or past the parakeet cages. The air carried a heavy, comforting scent, faint sizzle of the grill up front, mixed with the faint mustiness of linoleum polish and stacked cardboard. This was the five and dime, and if you were looking for more than just a spool of thread or a new notebook, you headed straight for the back. There, tucked away from the narrow aisles of hardware and stationery, was a row of circular stools bolted to the floor, padded in red or green vinyl, and topped with a polished chrome base. This is the world the lunch counter came from, and the world that quietly disappeared. In the 1950s, the lunch counter was the beating heart of the American downtown. It was a fixture so common we took it for granted, yet it provided a specific kind of ordinary dignity that has almost entirely vanished from our modern landscape. So first, we're looking at the rise and fall of the five and dime lunch counter, a place that was built on pedestrian foot traffic, sustained by a specific social ritual, and ended when the world decided that speed was more important than presence. To understand the lunch counter, you have to picture a Wednesday in 1957. You're downtown running errands, maybe grabbing something from the hardware store, dropping off clothes at the dry cleaner. It's just past noon. You don't make a reservation. You don't even look for a sign. You simply step into a Woolworth's or a Kresge's because you know the counter is there, as reliable as the sidewalk outside. You sit down, and before you've fully settled, a glass of water appears in front of you. The menu was a laminated card or a chalkboard above the grill, and it was built for speed. You could get a ham salad sandwich for 29 cents, cream of tomato soup for 20 cents, or an open-faced turkey sandwich with gravy for 85 cents. The food wasn't fancy, but it was consistent. You watched the cook work the flat-top grill right in front of you, the hiss of the spatula against the metal providing the soundtrack to your meal. It turned a simple shopping trip into a special moment in time, a chance to rest for 20 minutes before heading back into the rush. What made these counters unique wasn't just the food, it was the context. Unlike a standalone diner, the lunch counter was woven into the fabric of a retail store. SS Kresge alone operated nearly 1,000 locations nationwide at its height, most featuring a counter. This created a space where people met on equal footing, something we almost never experience now. A businessman in a tailored suit might sit next to a factory worker on his break. A mother with a toddler might sit next to an older man eating alone. You were all at the same counter, eating the same food, at more or less the same price. There was a particular physical arrangement that mattered. The linear setup put strangers in parallel, not conversation range. You weren't across from anyone, which meant there was no performance required, no sustained eye contact, and no obligation to make conversation. You could simply be present in a room full of people going about their day. It was a form of low-pressure companionship, a way to be alone without being isolated. At a counter, you were part of something without having to join anything. But before the lunch counter disappeared, it also had to change. We cannot talk about the dignity of the lunch counter without acknowledging that for a long time, that dignity was not universal. In the segregated South, many of these spaces that seemed to put everyone on equal footing were reserved for white customers only. This tension came to a head on February 1st, 1960, when 4 black college students sat down at the Woolworth's counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and asked to be served. They were refused, but they stayed in their seats. Within weeks, sit-ins spread to dozens of cities, turning the lunch counter into a front line for the civil rights movement. By July of that year, the Greensboro counter was desegregated. The very ordinariness of the counter is what made it such a powerful place to claim equality. It was a fixture of daily civic life that everyone should have had the right to access. Meanwhile, even before the suburbs fully reshaped everything, fast food was already changing the equation. McDonald's opened its first franchise in 1955, offering a standardized menu and no table service. It was designed for people in cars who wanted to grab food and keep moving. While the lunch counter required you to stop, sit, and wait, even if only for 5 minutes, fast food offered a consistency and a speed that the old model couldn't match. By the 1960s, the decline of the lunch counter didn't happen because people stopped being hungry. It happened because the ground shifted beneath the stores that housed them. Throughout that decade, The American population began a steady migration away from downtown commercial districts and into suburban neighborhoods built around the car. Counters anchored the walkable circuit of downtown. They thrived when errands formed a natural loop. When people stopped walking past Woolworths as part of their routine, they stopped ducking in for lunch. As the suburbs grew, a different model of retail and dining emerged. Kresge's began converting its stores into the Kmart discount format as early as 1962, a transition that often left the lunch counter behind. These new big box stores were built on cheap land, surrounded by massive parking lots. They replaced the clerk behind the counter with open shelves, encouraging customers to pick out items themselves and carry them to a central checkout. This was more efficient and allowed for lower prices, but it stripped away the personal service that had defined the five and dime. By the 1970s, another pressure was building. The economics of labor also became a factor. A lunch counter required a skilled short-order cook and a staff to handle split shifts. People who knew the regulars and could move a line quickly. As wages rose through the 1970s, it became increasingly expensive to maintain a staffed, served experience while keeping prices low. Fast food chains solved this by moving to self-service formats. Customers ordered at a window, carried their own trays, and bussed their own tables. The lunch counter never made that trade. It remained a served experience until the end, which made it beautiful but also made it economically fragile. By the time the food court arrived in malls during the 1970s and 80s, the experience had changed entirely. The food court was a collection of individual windows, where the informal back and forth between a cook and a customer was replaced by a transaction with a stranger. There was no one to refill your coffee without you getting up and waiting in a new line. The rhythm of the meal no longer matched the rhythm of the day. The five and dime lunch counter also relied on a supply chain that was beginning to vanish beneath it. In the mid-century era, these stores bought simple, American-made goods in volume. Household goods from Midwest factories, toys from New England workshops, sewing supplies from Southern mills. By the 1970s and 80s, manufacturing shifted overseas, allowing discount chains to sell the same items for a fraction of the cost. The five and dime, with its expensive downtown storefront and high labor costs, simply couldn't compete. Woolworths tried to adapt, experimenting with different formats, but the core challenge remained. The reasons people had once chosen them, the location, the familiarity, the service, weren't enough to offset the lower prices of the suburban giants. When Woolworths closed its last U.S. stores in 1997, the lunch counters finally went cold for good. Most had already been dismantled years prior, replaced by extra shelving or left to gather dust in the back of empty buildings. What we lost wasn't just a cheap place to get a grilled cheese, it was a frame around the time. Like Saturday morning cartoons or the drive-in movie, the lunch counter provided a ritual with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It gave the morning a shape. When you knew the counter would be there at noon, the rest of your errands felt organized. It was a reliable public space where you could sit for an hour and nobody would bother you. A low-stakes environment that held the community together in small, quiet ways. The transaction in a modern fast food restaurant is efficient, but it isn't woven into the fabric of your day the same way. You don't know the people working there, and they don't know your name or your usual order. The five and dime lunch counter vanished because the world it was built for changed. The streets, the costs, and the way we travel all shifted. The stores couldn't move with the pedestrians because the pedestrians had all gotten into their cars and driven away. If you remember sitting at one of those counters, you probably remember exactly where it was. The town, the store, even the specific stool. You remember the stool's distinctive squeak as it swiveled, the solid heft of the ceramic coffee mug, the quiet way the plate arrived in front of you. Those details matter because they represent a time when our daily lives were anchored by human connection rather than digital efficiency. The morning is gone, and the downtown systems of the 1950s have mostly been dismantled. But for a long time, in the back of a Woolworths on an ordinary Wednesday, someone set a plate of food in front of you and asked if you needed anything else. And for a long time, that was exactly enough. Remembering that small kindness and that simple place is one way we keep that calmer, more connected version of everyday life alive, even now.